of fake news and things, Brother Dennis questioned me about some things. And so I think I made some statement about one of them being that Jesus is mentioned as crying or shedding tears 3 times. And I went back after Todd raised some questions. And the first time that it happens is here in the resurrection of Lazarus. That Jesus, when it says Jesus wept, that was the first time. Oh, my fact checker just walked back in. So I'm giving you all the credit for a reason I'm explaining all this to you, Todd. The second time that he is referred to as crying is whenever he had left Bethany. He had come into Bethany 6 days before Passover, right before he died. And as he was coming down from the Mount of Olives, he saw Jerusalem. And he stopped there it's in Luke, and he cried over Jerusalem. And he wailed. It was a sad time. The next time and the last time that Jesus is referred to as crying is in Hebrews. In Hebrews 5 and 7, it says, "Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared." That is referring back to what? The garden. The 3 times that we have record that Jesus wept, the resurrection of Lazarus, looking over Jerusalem as he was descending there, heading down to what we would refer to as Palm Sunday, and then in the garden when he prayed. There are 3 different phrases, 3 different types of words that are different Greek words that are used. In John the 11th chapter, the word that's there is just cried. It is a silent cry. It's just shedding tears. It's no wailing. It's no making any boisterous shouts of any kind. But when he is looking over Jerusalem in Luke 19:41, it said, when he came near, he beheld the city and wept over it. And that is to sob, to wail aloud. And in the dictionary, when it gave that definition, it also said, whereas the word that's used back in John 11 is to cry silently. In Hebrews, the word is there, it says strong crying. That strong is forcible, boisterous, mighty. And the crying was a wailing of those in distress. Jesus had strong emotions. And I think they came out in the way that he cried and the reasons that he cried. And I think we were discussing also at that time last week possibly why Jesus was crying. And I'm going to confess to you that I can't come up with a definitive reason. I can come up with something that makes sense for me. When Jesus, in John 11, verse 35, 33, Mary has come to him. And she makes the statement, had you been here, my brother would not have died. And in verse 33 it says, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Okay, it's interesting that right after that, he says, where have you laid him? And she says, come and see. And it says, Jesus wept. It makes it seem like that because of their crying, that Jesus, or their wailing, they weren't crying like Jesus cried. They were wailing, they were sobbing. And the reason, well, why would Mary be crying? Give me a good reason for that one. She'd lost her brother. I mean, that one makes sense. The Jews, it says Jews, it doesn't say their friends, their kindred or anything. It says the Jews. These could very likely have been paid mourners. And they were doing the same thing she was. They were wailing. It was a very demonstrative act. And it's after that that Jesus groaned in the Spirit. It means he was troubled. He had strong feelings. The groaning in himself, King James says groaned in himself. The New American Standard says was deeply moved within. It's to feel strongly about something, to be deeply moved. It carries with it, in that case there, and the word says strength. It's like a horse snorting. There's something has irritated him. Jesus is irritated when this happens. And it says he was troubled, and the word is he troubled himself. I think, based on how it's happened, he sees Mary crying, he sees these other people crying, and I think Jesus cries out of compassion for them, for Mary primarily. I don't think for the others, because the others weren't, I don't think, if they were paid mourners, they weren't genuinely mourning the loss. But then the question was, okay, well, why would Jesus, after we talked about the fact that Jesus knew what was going on, he delayed coming from where he was to Bethany when he heard that Lazarus was sick for the express purpose that Lazarus would die and he would raise him. A far better thing, and it was to give God the glory and give the Son of God the glory. But he was touched. He was touched by their emotions. He was touched by their feelings. It says he was their friend. He was friends with that family, very close to them. Even though he knew that he was going to raise him from the dead. Probably the sorrow of having to raise Lazarus or letting Lazarus die so that this could happen. But it was necessary. And Lazarus was a righteous man, so it didn't affect him. But also, I think maybe he was crying at, and this is something that Missy had said last week, at the unbelief. What level of belief did Martha and Mary have about their brother and Jesus? Father, I mean, not Father, but Jesus, had you been here, you could have stopped this. And right after that, in verse 35, after Jesus wept in verse 35, 36 says, Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. But then and some of them said, Could not this man have opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? How much feeling was there? How much understanding? How much belief was there? None. And maybe that irritated him. But something definitely did, and it was with some indignation that Jesus was miffed at him, if you will permit that. But as to the exact reason, commentators, you can come up with different things and different reasons, but you can't back any of them up exactly. Any comments? Tommy?
This Bible has a reference over Romans 12:15, which says, Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep.
Yeah, and I had seen that one and I had marked it down. I didn't at this point here. But yes, and what is he telling us? We're to have compassion. We're to, whenever a brother weeps, we weep with them, and I think we do that. Oh, we may not sit there and cry, but we console. We are there when a brother or a sister loses a friend or some catastrophe happens. And then we also rejoice when they rejoice. Whenever there is something good that happens in their lives, we should rejoice with them. And Jesus is no different. Jesus is no different. Just because he's the Son of God doesn't mean that he's above that. Any other comments, questions? I don't have any good answers possibly. But okay. Verse 34. Jesus asked, Where have you laid him? And they tell him to come see. So we've gone through that here. Back to verse 37, though. Whenever they said, Could not this man have that opened the eyes of the blind, raised or made it that even this man should not have died. Which takes more power? To heal a sick man or to raise the dead? Same. That is something that's supernatural. That is something that God can do. Only God can do. And they didn't understand that because a lot of them did not accept him as deity. I'm sure that Martha and Mary, to at least some extent, did. She said, I believe that you're the Christ who should come into the world. But by her reactions in a few minutes that we're going to read about, we may have different thoughts. Okay. And then again, in verse 38, it says that Jesus... Let me go back over here to... It said, and Jesus therefore again, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave, and it was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. What's Mary's reaction, Martha's reaction to that? She's appalled, definitely. What does she say?
Because it's been 4 days.
Yeah.
It's been 4 days.
It's been 4 days. He's beginning to stink. If not...
I think that's what it was. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Charge right to the goal line. That's what I think that confused Martha and probably everyone else there was the fact that it had been 4 days. And I think last Wednesday I said the body had begun complete decay. I mean, it was, and I'm thinking in my little mind, that probably they thought he was too far gone for Christ to bring him back. That's what I'm thinking. They were relying on, if you'd come earlier, you could have healed him. But now he's been dead 4 days, and it's way past that.
I don't have any problem with that explanation. I just wonder if they even thought that he could do it. Okay, now he'd raised who? The widow's son at Nain. He had raised Jairus, his daughter. How long had they been dead? A day, basically. They buried their dead within a day. So he meets there at Nain. He meets her coming out to bury her son. He's been dead less than a day. Jairus, his daughter, had just died. It would be very easy for someone to say, no, you didn't raise him from the dead. He wasn't dead. And I think I relayed to you that they believed that the spirit hung around the body for 3 days after death, waiting, hoping to be reunited with the body. And then after it sees the decay setting in, it goes on to wherever it's going. Now, I'm not telling you that's what really happens. I don't know. That's what they believed about it. But I think Mike is right to a large extent. They realized at that point in time, they believed that it was beyond Jesus' ability to do anything. But she makes that statement back then, I believe that whatever you ask of him, God will give it to you. I'm sorry?
Doesn't your spirit leaves the body when you die, don't it?
Yes, sir, it does.
So the first day or whenever, you're still the spirit has already left you.
Yeah, you're right, Don. It leaves, but cultures have had different beliefs about what happens. The Jews, I read another thing that the Jews believed, that whenever a person dies, and I don't understand how this is supposed to be, but there's an angel that comes, and he's got a sword or a sickle or something, and it has a drop of poison on it. And in 3 days, he drops, whenever the person sees that angel, he opens his, out of shock, sees it, and then the drop hits, and the decay starts right then. I mean, those are tales. Those are not necessarily true. In fact, I would think they're not. But that's what they believed. So they believed that it was within 3 days that a person could easily be brought back. They're still dead. They're still dead. And whether Jesus heals a person that's been dead for 10 minutes, a day, or 4 days, he's dead. I mean, does anybody have anything? I mean, it's been fascinating as you read things about this. And when she says that, he's been dead 4 days. He's beyond bringing back. Remember, I read that, and I told you that the pagans believed that not even God could raise the dead. And that was their gods. They didn't know Jehovah. And verse 39. For her to say that he's stinking, that's proof that Lazarus is dead. You don't have a live body that starts decaying. Jody.
Well, that's what we talk about, the fact of why he waited an additional days to get there. I think that was one of the reasons. If he knew their superstitions about the spirit hanging around, then he wanted to prove that he was the Son of God, that he could perform this. And, he didn't want them to think, well, they staged all this. He came the day after, or he was here that, when Lazarus died, and he staged it, so it looked like he performed this miracle, so we would believe. He wanted everybody to think, there's no way anybody can bring this man back. He's been gone for 4 days. He came.
I agree with you. I think that's exactly why he waited, to prove that he was the resurrection. Because if you've got any doubts, if there's anything that can be said, because, there's people that are declared dead that aren't dead even today, that, quote, come back. But when you're dead, when you're literally dead, no, you don't come back. But this was proof that was happening. But what does this say about Martha's? I get those two mixed up in my talking. What does that say about Martha's faith? That statement she made back there whenever she met him at the place when he had stopped and said, I believe whatever you ask of God, he will give you, even now. Did she really believe that? I don't think so. I think she thought that. She wanted to believe that. But had she really thought that, she wouldn't have said what she said. She didn't expect anything to happen at this point. Jesus said unto her in verse 40, Said I not unto thee that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God? What is this glory of God and the glory for the Son of God that he's talking about? The power. That's part of God's overall glory. If God can do this, if Jesus can do this, they had no doubts, I think, that God could do it, but they weren't in tune with the fact that Jesus was God, that he was deity. But look what he says in verse 41 and 42. He said, he prayed and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. When we pray to God and we want something, how do we go about that? If I want God to do something for me. I remember whenever Dad died, this has been a long time ago, that my mother told me she didn't want to live the rest of her life alone. She was close to 50, maybe a little bit later, past that. And I prayed that he would, find somebody for her. And so I asked that he do that. We ask God to do things for us, whatever it is, to heal somebody, to help somebody, to give us the things that we need. But what is Jesus asking for here? Nothing. He's not asking for anything. What is he saying? Father, I thank you that you hear me and that you always hear me. And he says that, and he also says, I'm saying this so that they know that you sent me to do this. This is something that's been planned, that the Father has already approved. Dan King said this, that the prayer is not one of thanksgiving, that Lazarus, not a prayer that Lazarus might be brought to life. This request has already been made and responded to by the Father. The Father has ostensibly given his permission. Lazarus will rise that day. For the sake of those who are standing around, however, he offers his gratitude to the Father that they may see his dependence upon God and note that God sent and commissioned him to this assignment. That's what Jesus is trying to get across to them. And what is the next thing that happens? Verse 43, and it said, and then he had thus spoken, he said with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And it said that he that was dead came forth bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. Whenever you raise a person, as Lazarus was, has been dead 4 days, as Jesus did, what did Jesus demonstrate his power over? Death. He showed his power over death. Because remember, he says, I am the resurrection. And whenever he said that back there, he said, yeah, that's true. But we're going to get to the life in just a minute. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. What Jesus is showing, I believe. This is a preview of what's going to happen at the end of time. People that have been dead for centuries are going to raise. People that have been dead for a few minutes are going to be raised. Everybody will be raised, whether it's to a resurrection to the good or to the bad. The power that Jesus had. Okay, here's some things that he demonstrated, how he demonstrated his power over death. He demonstrated it by delaying his return to Bethany until Lazarus died and was buried, instead of frantically returning to prevent the death. It would have been easy for him to do that. Exactly. And that's one thing Martha and Mary didn't figure out either. He could have healed him from where he was. He didn't have to say anything. All he had to do was just make it happen. Number two, he arrived in Bethany 4 days after Lazarus was buried. And as this one that I took these from said, burial occurred the day of death according to the Jewish legend. And here's the thing. The Spirit hovered over the corpse 3 days before departing for Sheol. To everyone in Bethany, all hope of resurrecting Lazarus had vanished by the time Jesus arrived. Lazarus had disappeared beyond recall. That's what they believed. And that's what Martha believed. The third point. By correcting, he's shown his power over death by correcting Martha's faulty perception of his nature. Her faith in him as the Son of Man remained true and unabated, but it lacked the immediacy of meaning. In other words, she said, you are the Son of God. But she did not understand what that meant with what he could do. He still did it by the power of God. But he did it at the command of God. He showed it by precipitating a crisis that brought about his ministry to a self-chosen goal. Okay, what does that mean? Jesus knew that when he does this, that his time is coming to an end. That this is setting in motion Because what happens after this is that the high priest says, he's got to die. And they put out a wanted poster on Jesus, telling people, if you know where he's at, tell us that we may take him. And he shows his power over death by making the resurrection a public event. Have you thought about that? There were people here that were family members. There were people here that probably didn't know anything about the family. But he ordered the stone removed, which frightened Martha. By ordering the stone removed, Jesus guaranteed that it would be an actual physical body rising from the grave. Think about that. There's going to be an actual body, which is what we know that happened. It wouldn't be a spiritual resurrection any more than Jesus' personal bodily resurrection was a spiritual experience in the heart of believers, as some may think. For Jesus, an actual bodily resurrection, and for Lazarus were the same. However, there was a difference in the body. Lazarus had to go back to his old body, and it was not a glorified body because he died again. But Jesus' was a glorified body. And then to the amazement, Jesus called Lazarus by name. To be able to call a person back from the dead by name and then have that person appear is going to be part of the glory that would be seen. When he raised Jairus, his daughter, in Mark 5, he just told the damsel, he said, "Damsel, arise." And she did. But he spoke it loudly. You ever wonder why he said with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth"? Okay, well, that's true. Mike said he wasn't in the cave. That's true. But is he having to say it loudly so he can go all the way across to wherever Lazarus is? No, I don't think so. But exactly. He's saying it so everybody will hear it. This is not going to be something that's going to be done in secret. This is not going to be something that will be, well, did he do it? Yes. He called him by name. He did it loudly so that everybody would know it. It was spoken to an individual, a spirit in Hades. And it said, there among millions at rest or in turmoil, one person, one spirit heard, listened, and left, and came back to a body. Albert Barnes in his commentary said this: the power of raising the dead is the highest at which we can achieve. The ancient pagans declared it to be even beyond the power of God. It implies not merely giving life to the deceased body, but the power of entering the world of spirits, of recalling the departed soul and of reuniting it with the body. He that could do this must be omniscient as well as omnipotent. This is a striking illustration of the general resurrection. In the same manner, Jesus will raise all the dead. This miracle shows that it is possible, shows the way in which it will be done by the voice of the Son of God, and demonstrates the certainty that He will do it. Jesus raised Lazarus. He is the resurrection. There are 3 verses in John. Because when Jesus says, "I am the resurrection," that means He is the one that's going to be. John 6:40, "And this is the will of Him that sent me, that everyone which seeth the Son and believeth on Him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day." 4 verses further in 6:44, "No man can come to me except the Father which has sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day." 10 verses later, John 6:54, "Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day." Who's going to do the raising? Jesus. Jesus is the resurrection. Okay, we haven't spent a lot of time on the life, but we've done it on the resurrection. I want to spend a little bit of time here with that, even though our next topic will be, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." This is about I am the resurrection and the life. In page 27 of the book that you have there, Brother Campbell said, where there is resurrection, there is life. And that makes sense. You have a dead body, you're going to reunite a spirit with it, you have life. And since Jesus is the resurrection, and where there is a resurrection, there is life, doesn't it make sense that Jesus is the life? He controls life. That doesn't mean that Jesus is alive, although He is. He is the life. Where did life come from in the beginning? When John, in Genesis 2, God breathed into the, how'd that verse go? Breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Life was given to him. But can I give life to somebody else? No. Only through donating something from my body to help somebody with life. But I'm not giving life. Jesus gives life. And when He told Martha, I am the resurrection and the life, He said after that in verse 26, whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. He's not talking physical death, folks. He's talking spiritual. Physical death, but this life is physical life, spiritual life. Because we will all die. But He says here, if you who live and believe in me will never die. That's spiritual life. Because for a Christian, it's just as if you've gone from you've gone from one state to another. You are still alive. You have a body that's gone. And that body will be raised again incorruptible. John 1 and verse 4, it says, in Him was life, and the life was the light of men. John 6:33, for the bread of God is He who cometh down from heaven and giveth life unto the world. And in John 10:28, I give unto them eternal life, and they will never perish. So what do we have? We have Jesus is the I Am. He's Lord God Almighty, Jehovah. He's Yahweh. We studied that He is the Son of God. He is the resurrection and the life. And when we say the, what else? Who else does that leave out? Everybody. There is one. He is the resurrection. He is responsible for resurrection. He is the life. He gives life. And only He does. God gave Him that authority. He will use it. Are there any comments or questions?
Could I ask you one other question?
You certainly can.
Did Mike say that Lazarus was in the grave, or was he out of the grave?
He said he wasn't in the grave. Well, he was talking about that Lazarus, the spirit, was not in the grave. And he's true. That's true. But we don't know where, because it's a spirit, he's a spirit in a spiritual environment then. We don't know where that exists. But that's my understanding of what Mike meant. He wasn't really in the grave, but his body was. But his body was. Okay, next week. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14, verse 5. Go back to the 13th chapter, because it sets up there. Jesus is getting ready to depart. This is His last time with the disciples. He is telling them that He is going to go away. They'll see Him, then He'll be away for a while, then they'll see Him again, then He'll be gone again, and they're confused. So start with that. Thank you for your comments, your questions. We'll continue next week.